a village in flames, a father executed for the crime of knowledge, and a girl, bound in silence, delivered like a possession to a man feared by all. In the heart of Cairo, under the weight of empire and betrayal, one soul must decide, submit or survive. What begins as servitude soon becomes something far more dangerous, a collision of loyalty and longing, of buried secrets and forbidden glances. And when duty demands obedience, will love dare to rise? Welcome to the Crimson Veil, a sweeping historical romance where every gaze holds a secret and every silence hides a storm. Tell us, where in the world are you listening from? And what do you love most about historical love stories filled with tension, sacrifice, and impossible choices? Cairo, Egypt, the year of our Lord 1882. The desert winds carried not only sand that season, but smoke, dark, rising, bitter smoke that twisted through the Nile's golden light, announcing to the city that something sacred had been taken. Far from the palaces and polished marble of the capital, in a quiet village surrounded by tamarisk trees and fields of barley, life ended in the time it takes a flame to catch dry paper. The soldiers came at dawn, boots thundering, bayonets flashing like lightning under a cloudless sky. They spoke English, shouted orders, and moved with the cold, mechanical efficiency of men who saw no faces, only commands. Rania's father had stood tall in the center of the house, the Quran in one hand, and the worn, leather-bound books of poetry and mathematics in the other. He had refused to burn them. He had refused to kneel, and for that, they shot him. The scream that tore from Rania's throat was not heard over the shots, not then, nor when they dragged her away, with nothing but the blood-stained scarf around her shoulders and the taste of ash in her mouth. Her wrists were bound, her hair unpinned and tangled by wind and grief. She did not cry again. Not when they marched her for days. Not when they fed her like an animal. Not even when they told her she had been sold. The city appeared before her like a mirage. Cairo, vast and ancient, domes gleaming under the unforgiving sun, mosques rising beside palaces like guardians of a memory no one could protect. She was led through streets she had never imagined, past veiled women and arrogant officials, toward the gates of a mansion whose walls were high enough to silence whatever lived within. The servants barely looked at her. A few women, veiled in white linen, glanced up only to glance away again. A man in uniform barked orders in Turkish and Arabic, his tone indifferent, like someone listing livestock. "The girl is for the general," someone said. That name echoed inside her like a curse. General Amir el-Sadi. They spoke of him in the transport cage. That he was ruthless, that he never smiled, that his last servant disappeared after breaking a cup. Some said he fought for the British, others whispered he hated them. But everyone agreed on one thing: he trusted no one. And no one dared look into his eyes for long. They bathed her before presenting her, stripped her, scrubbed her skin until it burned, bound her hair in a coarse white scarf. They wrapped her in a long robe of faded linen, cinched at the waist with a worn leather cord. No jewelry, no shoes, no name. She was brought to the inner hall just after the noon prayer. The room was vast, cold, echoing, built of white marble streaked with veins of silver grey. The ceiling rose so high that Rania could not see where the lanterns hung from, only the reflection of sunlight on polished stone. The air smelled of incense, old wood, and something heavier: power. He entered without warning. General Amir el-Saadi did not march. He moved with the certainty of someone who had no need to announce himself. Tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform dark green with gold accents, his boots clicking softly on the floor. His face was neither cruel nor kind. It was carved, silent, unreadable. A short beard framed a mouth that did not smile. His eyes were dark, like a storm behind closed shutters. He stopped just a few paces from her. Rania, trained by instinct and fear, lowered herself to her knees. She did not tremble, but her hands ached from how tightly she pressed them against the stone. Her eyes stared at the hem of his robe. at the golden thread that shimmered like a chain. A long silence passed. She felt his gaze like heat on her skin, curious, clinical, distant. "She does not speak?" he asked. "No, Excellency," answered a voice behind him. "She has not uttered a word since her capture." Another pause, longer, deeper. "Then let her remain silent." He turned. The folds of his robe moved like shadows behind him. The doors closed. Rania remained on her knees long after the hall had emptied, long after the echo of his steps had vanished into silence. She did not know what awaited her in that palace of stone and secrets, but something told her, without words, without warning, that she had not just entered a stranger's house. She had stepped into the very heart of fate. The first morning Rania awoke inside the house of General Amir el-Sadi. She did not open her eyes immediately. She lay still on the narrow mat they had given her, the stone floor beneath it cool even in the warmth of the Egyptian dawn. A thin curtain of linen separated her sleeping space from the rest of the servant quarters. A row of simple beds, wooden chests, and rusted lanterns hanging from blackened beams. Outside, the muezzin's call to prayer echoed faintly across the rooftops of Cairo, as it had every morning of her life. But here, within the high walls of this unfamiliar palace, the sound felt different, muted, distant, almost like a memory she could not reach. When she finally opened her eyes, she was no longer a daughter, no longer a student, no longer free. Her day began in silence. She did not speak. She did not ask questions. She listened. In the servants' hall, everything moved with discipline. The other women, some older, some young like her, walked in pairs, lowered their gazes, and kept their voices to hushed whispers. Their garments were plain and clean, the same faded hues of sand, cream, or dull gray. No jewelry, no perfume, no silk. Even their hair was kept tightly braided or hidden beneath scarves. There was no room for vanity, only obedience. Halima was the first to notice her. She was a woman well into her 6th decade, with a stooped back and hands shaped by years of labor, yet her eyes still sparkled with a wisdom that age could not dull. Her voice was a rasp softened by compassion, and when she spoke to Rania for the first time, it was not to offer welcome, but warning. "Do not try to be clever here, child," she whispered, as they peeled onions in the sun-warmed courtyard. "You are watched. We all are." Rania said nothing, only nodded once. Her silence did not seem to offend the older woman, who continued peeling as though she'd spoken to a ghost. "Some girls," Halima added, "think they can change their place, smile too brightly, speak too often. That never ends well, especially if he notices." Rania's gaze lifted slightly. He, of course, needed no name. The palace of General Amir el-Sadi was unlike anything Rania had ever known. Its architecture was Ottoman in grandeur, yet Egyptian in soul. Domed ceilings painted with gold leaf, arched doorways carved from cedar, latticed windows that filtered sunlight into sacred patterns on the floor. But beneath the beauty lay an oppressive stillness, like the hush before a storm. Servants moved like shadows, never lingering too long in any room. Guards patrolled with quiet discipline. No one laughed, no one cried, and the general himself seemed more myth than man, always glimpsed from afar, always spoken of in tones too low to echo. He did not dine with the household. He did not walk the halls without purpose. When he passed through the corridor, conversations stopped, heads bowed. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. It was only on the 3rd evening, as Rania scrubbed the marble floor of the west corridor, that she saw him again. The hallway was long and silent, lit by oil lamps mounted in brass sconces along the wall. She worked with a cloth and bucket, her knees sore, her fingers raw. Her veil had slipped slightly, but she did not dare adjust it. She focused only on her task. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. She froze. General Amir appeared at the far end of the corridor, accompanied by a man in British military dress. The foreigner's voice echoed, confident, clipped, English spoken like a command. "You understand, General, that there are concerns." Amir said nothing at first. His reply came only after a pause long enough to chill the blood. "My loyalty has never wavered," he said, his voice like iron sheathed in velvet. "But I do not serve the crown. I serve Egypt." Colonel William Hartley was a tall man with sharp eyes and a mouth that never smiled. He studied Amir with a predator's interest, a diplomat's caution thinly veiling a soldier's threat. "There are rumors, El Sadi, that you sympathize with the crescent dove, that your loyalties have evolved." Rania kept her head down, barely breathing. The crescent dove, the very name could invite imprisonment. Her father had once spoken of it, an underground symbol of resistance, of hope, of defiance against occupation. "Rumors are wind," Amir replied. "They vanish when the sun rises." Hartley did not answer. The two men passed, their voices fading into the distance. Rania remained kneeling, heart pounding, cloth clenched in her fingers. Only when she was certain they had turned a corner did she exhale. That night, the palace slept early, but Rania, restless and awake, wandered to the laundry room where a fire still glowed low. She sat beside the embers, hands outstretched, letting the warmth reach her bones. The silence was heavy, but not empty. There was a tension in the air, as if something beneath the walls, something unsaid, pulsed just beneath the surface. She was about to return to her quarters when she saw a flicker of movement near the library doors. The room was dim, lit only by a single oil lamp on a central desk. Amir stood alone, back to the door, holding a letter in his hands. The flame's light caught the edge of the paper, a wax seal, broken, a symbol etched in black ink, the crescent dove. Without a word, he tore the letter into strips, dropped them into the fire. Each piece curled, blackened, vanished in the flames. His face betrayed no emotion. Only his eyes lingered on the burning paper for a moment longer than necessary, as though burying something sacred. Rania stepped back before he could sense her presence, her heart thundering. She returned to her mat in silence, but she did not sleep. The following morning, the entire palace was quieter than usual. The kitchen buzzed with nervous energy. There were whispers of British inspectors arriving, of soldiers passing through the streets, of names being added to lists no one wanted to be on. Halima noticed Rania's pallor and offered her a slice of bread. "You have seen something," she said, not as a question, but as a truth. Rania hesitated, then shook her head. "No," she whispered. "I saw nothing." The old woman nodded slowly. "Good. It is better to be blind than to be seen knowing." As the day passed, Rania returned to her chores with quiet precision. But now, the corridors felt different. The silence had teeth. The walls whispered names, and every glance, every pause, every breath held too long seemed like the edge of something sharp. She began to understand what this palace truly was, not just a home of stone and shadow, but a battlefield disguised as a sanctuary. And she, a girl once taught that words were power, was now caught between silence and truth, between fear and the man who lived behind those unreadable eyes. The sun dipped low behind the minarets of Cairo, casting the city in tones of amber and fire. The palace of General Amir el-Saadi stood illuminated not by the heavens, but by dozens of lanterns and brass sconces, lit one by one as the hour of the banquet approached. The halls smelled of polished cedar and orange blossom, the scent drifting through arched corridors in preparation for what promised to be a night of silk smiles and sharpened words. It was not a common occurrence for the general to open his doors to guests. His reputation for restraint bordered on myth, yet tonight the palace would host men who claimed to be allies, Ottoman dignitaries, British officers, and a scattering of Egyptian elites chosen for their usefulness, not their loyalty. Among them, two names stirred unease in the staff: Colonel William Hartley, the British emissary with a soldier's gait and a diplomat's smirk, and General Yusuf al-Mahdi, a man of Egyptian birth but British persuasion, whose rise through the ranks had left behind a trail of silenced opposition. Rania, draped in the traditional servant's robe of soft beige with a white headscarf, moved with practiced quiet through the main salon. Her hands carried a silver tray, her steps light, her gaze lowered as she arranged goblets on the carved sycamore table. The walls around her shimmered with tapestries of navy and gold. Crystal chandeliers caught the lamplight and cast it in fragments over the polished floor. She had been assigned to serve wine, a task both delicate and dangerous. Every movement would be watched, not only by the guests, but by the other servants eager to avoid scandal. Yet she moved without hesitation. Her silence had become her shield, her grace a kind of armor. The guests arrived in staggered procession. Their boots clacked against the stone. Their voices filled the hall with languages Rania recognized but dared not speak. Turkish, English, French. The click of medals, the rustle of satin sleeves, laughter that never reached the eyes. Amir entered last. He wore a deep emerald kaftan, embroidered in black and gold, with a high collar and brass buttons that gleamed like coins under firelight. His hair was brushed back, his beard trimmed close, his expression unreadable. He greeted no one with more than a nod, not even Hartley, who extended his hand with a grin that did not reach his cold, sea-colored eyes. "Your hospitality is most appreciated, General," Hartley said smoothly. "It's refreshing to see you embrace the social graces of command." Amir inclined his head. "Hospitality is not submission, Colonel." There was a pause, brief but cutting. Then a smile, measured and false. "Of course not," Hartley murmured. "I only meant that it's rare to see you entertain. Your attachment to local customs has always intrigued me." The words floated, soft as silk, sharp as glass. General Yusuf al-Mahdi approached next, his uniform crisp, his voice smooth with false warmth. "I told the colonel you'd surprise us," he said, clapping Amir on the shoulder with a familiarity that wasn't earned. "Even the lion must sometimes leave his cave." Amir did not flinch, but his eyes darkened. "Even the lion," he replied, "knows when he is surrounded by jackals." A servant nearby choked on air. Rania did not move. She stood near the wine table, her head bowed, her ears sharp. The banquet unfolded in layers of civility and strategy. Plates of lamb roasted with cumin and dates, trays of saffron rice, olives marinated in pomegranate molasses, each dish a symbol of Egypt's wealth and history, each one served by hands that trembled slightly beneath composed faces. Rania served in silence, moving between foreign uniforms and native silk. She felt eyes on her, curious, dismissive, hungry, but none lingered as long as the glance Amir cast her way when she poured wine into his goblet. Their eyes met only for a moment, a breath between gestures. His gaze was as steady as ever, but something beneath it wavered, just enough to leave her breathless. She looked away first. After the final toast, the men retired to the garden courtyard, smoke from cigars, mingling with the scent of jasmine and earth. Hartley and al-Mahdi stood near the colonnade, their voices hushed but urgent. "She's still in his household," Hartley said, flicking ash from his cigar. "A girl with a name no one speaks, pretty, educated, and now he's keeping her close." Al-Mahdi shrugged, but his jaw tightened. "You want her gone?" Hartley didn't answer immediately. His gaze followed the shadows along the wall, where a pair of doves fluttered beneath the carved lattice. "We remove the girl, and his silence becomes grief," he said at last. "We remove the general, and it becomes war." Al-Mahdi's reply came with a slow, deliberate nod. "Then we begin with her." Unaware of the decision sealed in that moment, Rania returned to the servants' quarters, her duties complete. But sleep eluded her. The night clung to her skin like linen in the summer heat. Her thoughts were not of the guests, nor the glances, nor even the cryptic exchanges she had overheard. They circled only one thing: the fountain. At the far end of the garden, hidden beneath fig trees and arching vines, lay a stone fountain long abandoned. Its basin was dry, the tiles chipped, its mosaic faded by time. But to Rania, it offered something she had not felt in weeks: stillness. She slipped through the outer corridor unnoticed. The moon hung low, casting pale silver over the garden. The night air smelled of crushed leaves and distant rain. She knelt by the fountain's edge, her fingers tracing the outline of a flower carved into stone. Her heart slowed. Her breathing softened. She did not hear him approach. "You don't sleep." His voice broke the silence like silk tearing in the dark. She rose halfway, startled, then froze. Amir stood a few paces away, his coat removed, his shirt collar undone. The lanterns behind him outlined the edge of his shoulders, the shape of his presence. He did not move closer. He did not retreat. "I didn't mean to," she began, her voice no more than a breath. "I know," he said. The silence stretched. Rania's eyes fell, but not in fear, in hesitation, in restraint. He walked to the opposite side of the fountain, placing his hand lightly on the cracked stone. The garden grew quieter still, as if even the night held its breath. "Do you like this place?" he asked. She nodded. "It's the only part of this house that isn't watching," she whispered. A shadow of a smile touched his mouth, then faded. "It was my wife's." The words fell between them like an offering. "I never knew her," Rania said softly. "She died before this war began." "Before everything became calculation." He looked away. She loved the sound of water, said it reminded her of home, of peace. They stood in silence, not as master and servant, not as symbols of empire and ruin, but as two people suspended in something quiet and aching. When he turned to leave, his gaze lingered on her one last time. He did not speak, but he watched her, longer than he should have. And somewhere, in the depths of her chest, beneath the ashes of all she had lost, Rania felt a flicker of something unnamed. Not hope, not yet, but the shape of its shadow. The morning came with a bitter wind, unseasonal for Cairo, and yet it seemed to sweep through the palace with unnatural purpose, as though it carried whispers, secrets, and intentions cloaked in the scent of burning oil and wet stone. The sky above was the color of tarnished silver, and within the walls of General Amir el-Saadi's estate, something had shifted. Rania noticed it the moment she entered the kitchen courtyard. Conversations fell silent as she passed. Eyes that had once avoided her now followed with veiled curiosity, some filled with pity, others with contempt. Pots clanged louder than usual. Bread was kneaded with sharper hands. The quiet order of routine had been fractured by something unseen, but unmistakably felt. She did not speak. She folded linen, fetched jars of lentils, swept ash from the hearthstones. She did not ask why the glances lingered, or why even Halima offered no words of warmth that morning. Her silence was not resignation, it was armor. It was not until midday, when a guard summoned her to the atrium, that she began to understand. There, standing near a column etched with Ottoman script, was the youngest maid, Fatima, a girl barely 16 with honey-colored eyes and too much ambition in her spine. She clutched a copper bracelet in her hand, lips pursed as if holding back tears. "She took it," Fatima said before anyone could speak, "from the table near the general's study. I saw her." The words fell with a weight far heavier than their sound. Rania stood still, the hem of her robe brushing the marble tiles. Her heart did not race. She knew too well the sharp scent of lies disguised as virtue, but lies in a palace like this could become a noose. She was alone in that corridor, Fatima added, her voice breaking in practiced tremble. "Only her. I swear by the Prophet." Amir entered. His presence cut through the murmurs like the scimitar at his hip. He did not wear the formality of a uniform this day, but a robe of midnight blue, the kind worn only within the house, private, unadorned. Yet even stripped of titles and medals, he held command in his very breath. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice without edge, but with gravity. Rania lifted her gaze for the first time. Her eyes met his, not in challenge, but in quiet defiance of falsehood. "No," she said. One word, unbending, soft as silk, strong as stone. He did not look at Fatima. He studied Rania's face, as though searching not for guilt, but for the space between innocence and pride. A long silence followed. Then, with a tilt of his head, he turned to the steward. "Conduct a search," he ordered. "All quarters, every garment, every basin and chest. I want no accusations without truth." The servants scattered like startled birds. Rania stood in the center of the atrium, still as a statue carved from almond wood. Fatima, pale and shaken by the unexpected weight of the general's restraint, was led away. By nightfall, the bracelet was found. It lay beneath a loose tile in Fatima's own chamber, tucked among ribbons and trinkets better left unspoken of. There were no screams, no punishment issued in public. The girl was simply gone by morning, her name erased like chalk in rain. But Rania, though cleared, remained uncertain. She had been summoned. The guard who came for her said nothing, only gestured toward the western wing, where few servants were ever called. She followed in silence, her pulse steady but deep, like the sound of distant drums carried on desert wind. The corridor she entered was dimly lit, lined with portraits of generals from centuries past, men with eyes that judged across time. At the end, a carved door stood ajar. Beyond it, the library. It was a vast chamber, lined with towering shelves of cedar and dust, books wrapped in leather and linen, scrolls stacked beside brass instruments, maps rolled and frayed with age. And in the center of it all, at a heavy desk with a green glass lamp, sat Amir. He looked up. "Come in," he said, not unkindly. She obeyed. He did not offer her a seat, but gestured toward a pile of scattered papers, maps, letters, ledgers. "You can read," he said. "That's rare. For a girl in your station." She did not flinch. "My father taught me." He nodded once. "And write?" She hesitated only a moment. Arabic, a little French, some Turkish. Something flickered in his eyes. Not surprise, not suspicion. Something else. Interest, perhaps. Or something more dangerous. Recognition. "Then tell me," he said, rising and placing a scroll before her. "What do you see?" It was a map of Lower Egypt, marked in red with troop movements and irrigation canals. She studied it carefully, tracing lines with her eyes, not her fingers. "This passage here," she said at last, "floods in spring. If you cross it then, you lose 3 days. If you wait, you risk ambush from the eastern ridge." He said nothing for a long moment. "You've seen this land." "No," she replied softly, "but my father had books. He made me memorize topography. He said a mind is a sword no one can take from you." He folded his arms, his gaze unreadable. "You will assist here in the evenings. The scrolls must be catalogued, the Ottoman reports translated, quietly. No one else will know." She bowed her head. "Yes, General." He turned back to his desk, as though the matter was settled. But that night, long after she had gone, he returned to the desk and unfolded one of the maps again. In the margin, where the ink was still drying, a note had been added in delicate feminine script. "Route viable in dry season only. Consider alternate supply path through El Manouf." He traced the letters with the tip of his finger, slowly, thoughtfully. Outside, the palace had fallen into sleep, but inside the library, a veil had lifted. Not entirely, not enough to see what lay beyond, but just enough to glimpse it. And for a man who trusted no one, the weight of one quiet mind had become impossible to ignore. The days grew shorter in Cairo, though the sun still bathed the city in its golden veil. In the palace of General Amir el-Saadi, however, the passage of time no longer followed the rhythm of the sun or the prayer calls. It pulsed instead, in the quiet rustle of paper, in the flickering of oil lamps, and in the footsteps of a girl who walked with grace and silence between shelves of forgotten books. The library had become Rania's sanctuary, not because it was warm, though it was, not because it was quiet, though the silence within it was sacred, but because here, her mind could breathe. Each evening, once her daily duties had been completed and the halls of the palace had settled into their stillness, she entered the room like one might enter a shrine. Her robes brushed the marble floor, her headscarf knotted loosely at her neck. She carried no perfume, no ornament, only a leather satchel filled with blank parchment and a reed pen she had trimmed herself. Amir no longer observed her from a distance. He left scrolls, maps, translated fragments of Ottoman reports on the long table by the window. He did not give instructions, he did not offer praise, but the documents changed, grew more delicate, more dangerous, more real. She noticed it on the sixth night. Among a bundle of letters wrapped in ribbon, she found one folded in a manner different from the rest. The seal was intact, but not fresh. The ink on the exterior bore a small mark in the shape of a crescent, barely visible beneath the wax. She opened it slowly, careful not to leave fingerprints, and read the contents in silence. It was written in code, a basic cipher, but one requiring patience. She spent over 2 hours transcribing the pattern, her breath shallow as she worked. When the final words took shape, her blood ran cold. A demonstration planned, sabotage imminent. The target is internal. Eliminate sympathy before the uprising. Dismantle the dove at the root. The letter bore no names, no signatures. But the implication was clear. The crescent dove, symbol of the Egyptian resistance, had been infiltrated, and the warning, by its vagueness, seemed less a report and more a threat. A threat crafted with intention, possibly forged, possibly by someone with much to gain from division. Her thoughts turned, unbidden, to General Yusuf al-Mahdi. She folded the letter carefully and placed it beneath a collection of maps on Amir's desk. She did not speak of it the next day, not to him, not to anyone. But when she returned to the library that evening, it was gone. Instead, in its place, was a new scroll, a military order, stamped and sealed, with one line underlined in red. Detain all students named in the list below. Deliver to British authorities by midnight. She read the names. Some she recognized. Sons of merchants, apprentices of scholars, boys who gathered in secret to read verses of defiant poetry, to whisper about a future they would never see. Amir returned late that night. He entered the library without ceremony, his boots dragging slightly, his left shoulder damp with blood. Rania rose at once, her breath caught in her throat. "Don't call anyone," he said. "I've already dismissed them." She stepped closer, her hands trembling but steady enough to guide him toward the chair near the window. The blood had seeped through the fabric of his robe and into the linen of his tunic. His face, though composed, was drawn and pale. A deep cut marred the curve of his jaw, just beneath the beard. "What happened?" she asked, voice low. "A riot," he murmured. "Or something they're calling one. It was meant to provoke a reaction. It succeeded." She knelt beside him, her fingers moving gently as she peeled away the fabric to reveal the wound. It was shallow but angry. She fetched water, cloth, and a salve from the side cabinet, one she had memorized during her nights alone in the library. He did not wince as she cleaned the cut, but his eyes never left her. "You're not afraid," he said suddenly. Her hands paused. "Of you? Of what I might become?" She looked up then, slowly, the cloth pressed against his skin. Their faces were close, the space between them thinner than a breath. "You already are what you've chosen," she replied softly. "The only question is what you will do with it." For a moment, neither moved. Then, without intention, without calculation, his hand found hers. It was not a grasp, not a command. It was the most human gesture he had made since she met him, and she did not pull away. He spoke again, quieter. "I falsified the reports." She blinked. "I replaced the student names. I said they fled before arrest. The ones on that list. They'll live, for now." A silence settled between them. more intimate than words. Her fingers curled slightly within his hand. "You shouldn't trust me," she said at last. "I don't," he answered. "But I trust something in you." She drew her hand back gently and resumed her work. He allowed it. The wound was dressed, his breathing steadied. But neither of them would forget the moment. Later that night, when she had returned to her quarters, Amir remained alone in the library. The oil lamp cast a low glow across the desk as he opened a letter bound in black ribbon, one he had carried for weeks but never read in full. It was from a British official in Alexandria. Its contents were direct. "You are no longer considered reliable. Prepare for reassignment. British command will assume oversight of your units effective immediately. Your presence in Cairo is no longer essential to our objectives." He stared at the page for a long time. Then, wordlessly, he reached for the flame. The parchment curled in the heat, blackening along the edges until the words disappeared. Ash drifted into the air like snow, and with it, something else left him, something he had carried too long in silence. Outside, the wind shifted, and within the palace walls, though no doors opened and no orders were given, something unseen had changed. A boundary had been crossed, not one marked by keys or chains, but by something far more fragile, a room without locks, and a girl who had never asked to be let in, only seen. The garden had once been a place of music. Long before soldiers patrolled the city gates and letters arrived sealed in fear, long before servants whispered behind closed doors and shadows listened from behind the lattice, the garden had been a sanctuary, a place where laughter echoed beneath the flowering arches, and the air was thick with orange blossom and jasmine. But now, the garden behind General Amir el-Sadi's palace was wild, half forgotten, and tangled with time. It was there that he took her. He said nothing when he appeared at the door of the library, only gestured for her to follow. Rania obeyed, her heart already alert. She moved behind him through the quiet halls, down the stone corridor, where the light turned golden before it vanished into vine-covered walls and soft earth. The gate creaked when he pushed it open, as if protesting its sudden return to memory. The garden had been carved long ago in the Ottoman style, with symmetrical paths, a dry marble fountain at its heart, and fruit trees bent with the weight of their age. The air was warm and thick, with the scent of dust and fading blooms. Jasmine vines spilled from every corner, their small white flowers pressing against the stone like forgotten prayers. Amir stopped near the center and looked around. "I haven't set foot here in 2 years," he murmured. Rania remained still, watching the way his eyes shifted, not guarded as usual, but somewhere far away in a memory that still breathed. His robe was simpler than the ones he wore before soldiers or foreign officers, a deep charcoal grey with no embroidery, no medals. He had left behind the man the world demanded and carried only the weight of the one it had broken. "She loved this garden," he said, so softly that Rania was not certain he had meant to speak aloud. "She used to say the scent of jasmine was the only honest thing in Cairo." He moved toward a low stone bench, half swallowed by creeping ivy. He sat. For a moment, he seemed lost in the silence, and then his voice, low and deep, rose again. Her name was Lamis. She died of fever. It was quick, less than 3 days. His jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on nothing. I was at the border. By the time I returned, she was already gone. They had buried her without me. Rania lowered herself onto the ground just across from him, her hands resting lightly in her lap. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "She was the only one who ever truly understood what I wasn't saying," he added after a pause. "She made this place, every vine, every tree. I couldn't bear to tear it down, but I couldn't bring myself to walk here either, until now." The breeze moved between them like a third presence, rustling the jasmine, lifting the veil of silence just enough. Rania's voice came softly, shaped by something deeper than grief, by the dignity of shared loss. "My father was a schoolteacher. He believed words could protect us. He hid books, poetry, history, logic, when they came to search the village." Her gaze met his. They shot him in the chest, then burned his books in the fire he kept to warm us. Amir's expression didn't change, but something in his posture did. The weight in his shoulders shifted, slightly but perceptibly. He used to say, she continued, that silence in the mouth means nothing if the mind keeps speaking, that we are always more than they think. For the first time, Amir looked at her with something different, not curiosity, not pity, but recognition. They sat there on opposite ends of a memory neither had named aloud until now. The garden held them in its quiet breath. The jasmine bloomed without fear of war, and the moon, hidden behind clouds, sent only faint traces of silver through the lattice of leaves. She stood then, slowly, her fingers brushing the nearest branch, as if asking permission to move. Amir rose as well. Their steps brought them closer without intent. They did not speak, they did not smile, but as she turned to leave, her fingers brushed his, lightly, like a question. He did not pull away. Their hands lingered, just a second longer than reason permitted, and then she was gone. The garden was still again, but it remembered. That night the palace spoke. Servants crouched near water jars and beneath staircases, whispered behind fans and closed doors. Rania's name passed between them like a coin, heavy with meaning. Some said she had bewitched him, others that he had chosen her to replace what he had lost. Most said nothing at all, for fear their words would echo back to his ears. In the kitchen, Halima placed a hand on Rania's wrist as she washed the herbs for morning tea. "Be careful," she said, her voice low and warning. "When a man like him lets you too close, you are no longer safe. Not from him, not from those who serve him." Rania looked up, but did not reply. She understood the woman meant to protect her, but she also knew that silence was no longer enough. Elsewhere, in a private room scented with imported tobacco and British cologne, Colonel William Hartley stood beside a map of Cairo, his fingers tapping the table in impatience. "You see it, don't you?" he said to General Yusuf al-Mahdi, who stood with arms folded. "She's the weakness, the crack in his stone." Al-Mahdi smirked. "He's not a man of emotion." "Every man is," Hartley replied. "It's just a matter of pressure." He turned back to the map, where pins marked in red circled neighborhoods known for nationalist stirrings. "We discredit him, we take Cairo," he said. "We disgrace him through her, and we bury the dove for good." Al-Mahdi raised an eyebrow. "And if she's just a servant, then she won't matter, and if she's more, then he's already lost." Back in the garden, the moon rose fully at last, bathing the jasmine in pale light. The night air grew still, as if the world itself were listening. And in a palace built of stone and silence, a bond had begun to bloom, fragile as a flower, dangerous as fire. The air was heavy that morning, thick with dust and the stillness that comes before a storm. Even the birds, usually chirping from the rooftop tiles at dawn, seemed to have fallen silent, as if Cairo itself held its breath. The sky was colorless, a shade between sand and steel, and within the palace of General Amir el-Saadi, the walls whispered unease. Rania had been sent on a simple errand, a delivery of medicinal herbs for the palace physician. Nothing more. The apothecary was only 3 streets away, a familiar route lined with copper vendors, baker stalls, and children racing barefoot through the alleyways. She wore a veil tightly fastened, her robes modest and unremarkable, her movements cautious and unseen. But when she turned the last corner toward the alley that led back to the palace gates, everything changed. A carriage stood waiting, unmarked, inconspicuous. The street had emptied in a way that felt too sudden, too clean. She sensed the danger a second too late. Rough hands pulled her from behind, cloth was pressed to her mouth, and a blindfold wrapped her in darkness. She struggled, but they were prepared. She shouted, but her voice was swallowed by silence. Within minutes, she was no longer in Cairo. The room they brought her to was small and cool, with walls of limestone and a faint scent of ink and sweat. Her wrists were not bound, but she was blindfolded still. That, somehow, was worse. They did not hit her. They did not insult her. Their cruelty was colder. They asked questions in low, practiced voices. What does the general keep in the library? What did you see in the fountain garden? Who visits him after dark? How many letters has he given you? She answered nothing. They spoke in Arabic, but it was clipped, too formal. One of them was educated. Another had the thick accent of the South. None gave names. At one point, one leaned close enough for her to smell cinnamon on his breath. "You think your silence will save you?" he murmured. "He won't come for you. You are just another servant." She breathed through her nose and said nothing. Her fingers trembled in her lap, but her back remained straight. After what felt like hours, they left. No further threats. No violence, only the scent of something burning as they walked out, the smell of papers or names. Then hands again, this time less forceful, placing her into another cart. Her blindfold was not removed until the gates of the palace came back into view. She stepped out alone. The guards recognized her at once. Their shock was evident, but they dared not ask questions. One of them ran ahead. The other simply opened the gate. She crossed the threshold of the palace like a shadow. Her veil was torn. Her feet ached. Her throat was raw from holding back the fear. She thought no one had seen her, but Amir was already waiting. He stood in the center of the inner hall, hands clasped tightly behind his back, his jaw clenched, his uniform discarded in favor of a dark robe that made him look less like a general and more like a storm-gathering form. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice too calm. She stopped. The words caught in her throat. "They took me." His eyes darkened. "Who?" "I don't know. They were masked. They knew everything." "What did you tell them?" he asked, stepping closer. "Nothing." He stood inches from her now, the scent of sandalwood and dust clinging to him like the remnants of battle. "You went alone," he said. "You left the gates without telling anyone." "I was sent," she replied. "I didn't choose to." "You let them take you." The words hit her harder than any blow. Her breath stopped. "I let them?" she repeated, the pain sharp behind her ribs. "I let them?" "You're not a fool," he growled. "You know you are watched. You know what you are to them. Do you think this is a game, Rania?" The sound of her name on his lips, once soft like a secret, now cracked like thunder. "I did not ask to be part of your war," she said, her voice shaking. "I serve. I stay silent. I survive. That is all." His face twisted, conflict written across every line. "You cannot survive in silence anymore," he said. "Then let me go." The words fell before she could stop them. He looked at her, stunned. "I want to leave," she said, slower now. "Not because I'm afraid, but because I have no place here. Not in your home, not in your secrets, not in your war." He said nothing. His silence was louder than anger. She stepped back. "Let me leave with my name." His voice broke only one word. "No." The refusal was quiet, final, not a command, not a threat. A plea in disguise. "Why?" she asked. Her throat burned. "You don't own me." His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw it. Fear, not of betrayal, not of scandal, but of loss. "Because if I let you go," he said, "you will disappear, and I will not be able to breathe." Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. "You kept me here with silence, not with words, not with truth. You don't even know who I am." He took a step forward, but she turned and fled before he could reach her. That night, the palace was hushed, its stones heavy with the weight of what had not been said. Behind the servants' wing, Rania sat on her sleeping mat, facing the wall. Her hands were folded in her lap, her veil removed, her eyes swollen from tears she had sworn not to shed. Outside her door, he stood, not in uniform, not as a general, as a man who had learned too late that loyalty could cut deeper than betrayal. He did not knock, he did not speak. He remained there for nearly an hour, listening to the sound of her breathing, broken, stifled, real. And when he finally turned away, he carried her silence like a wound. It began with smoke, Not the thin columns from cooking fires or the evening haze that often settled along the Nile, but thick, rising blackness, born from burning crates and torn flags and dreams too long smothered. Cairo, ever ancient and proud, awakened that morning not to prayer or bells, but to the clamor of boots and shouting, the splinter of glass against stone, the iron rhythm of resistance echoing through its narrow alleys. By midday, the rebellion had a name, and by sundown it had blood. Inside the palace, the marble floors remained polished, the halls serene in their illusion of control, but the calm was hollow. Servants no longer lingered near open windows. Letters arrived sealed in red wax, then burned before they could be read aloud. The scent of fear, sharp and metallic, clung to the air like incense meant to mask rot. Rania watched from the shadows of the upper balcony, her eyes fixed on the city below. Smoke curled into the sky like a serpent, rising behind the mosques and minarets. She recognized the area, a textile market once filled with song and life, now consumed. Amir had not spoken to her since the night she returned from her abduction, but his silence had changed. It was no longer a wall, it was the edge of a blade held too close to the skin. He walked the palace like a man hunted by his own conscience, barking orders that dissolved into hesitation. He slept little, ate less, and when he stood by the window, he did not see the city. He saw fire. That afternoon, a courier arrived on horseback, face pale beneath dust and sweat. The scroll he delivered bore the British seal and the insignia of Ottoman command. Amir received it in the study and read its contents without moving his lips. It was an order, immediate arrest and public execution of 8 men named as rebel leaders. Their crime, inciting sedition. Their sentence, death before witnesses. The paper trembled slightly in his hand. Among the names he recognized 4, former students, poets, sons of merchants. Men who had once sat at his table, eager-eyed and full of impossible questions. Men he had defended in silence, who now stood on the edge of the gallows. He knew what this was, not justice, a purge, a trap. That night, as thunder cracked faintly in the eastern sky, Amir summoned his most trusted guard, a man named Barakat, and gave no words, only a list written in his own hand. Then he disappeared into the streets under a hood, as he once had in younger years, long before titles shackled his movements. He returned hours later, soaked to the bone, his robe torn at the sleeve, but alive. The rebels had escaped, everyone, and with them, so had his future. From that moment, Amir el-Sadi was no longer a general. He was a traitor. The news came swiftly. British forces tightened their hold on Cairo's central quarters. Ottoman officers who had once bowed now turned away. Al-Mahdi issued a formal condemnation of Amir's failure to protect order and called for his arrest. The city burned brighter. Inside the estate, panic spread. Servants packed quietly. Some fled, others locked their doors and waited for the storm to pass. Halima wept silently as she folded linen, and when Rania found her in the corridor, the old woman kissed her forehead and said only, "Be braver than we were." Rania did not sleep. She walked the silent library like a ghost, her hands tracing the edges of shelves once sacred. The candlelight flickered against scrolls and letters, and in the deepest drawer of Amir's desk she found the second scroll, the one she had seen weeks ago, but had not dared to touch. She unrolled it carefully. It was a memorandum from the British Office of Military Affairs. A plan, a sequence, names, strategies. But what it truly was, hidden beneath symbols and military phrasing, was a death list. The general was to be removed from command after the executions. Quietly, the letter said. Honorably if possible, permanently if not. Her hands shook, but her mind, taught by her father, shaped by loss, was sharp. She reached for the cipher book he had once gifted her as a child, pages worn and stained, and with her reed pen and steady breath she translated, line by line. She copied the message on a separate parchment, disguising it beneath harmless inventory numbers. The true letter she burned. The ash she scattered from the library window, watching it vanish into the wind like all truths denied by power. But she was not finished. That night, dressed in a servant's plain linen robe and with her hair tightly braided beneath a scarf, she walked through the back gardens, past the jasmine tree, and slipped through the hidden gate Amir had once used to visit his wife's grave. No one saw her. The contact waited in the courtyard of an abandoned hammam, the fountain dry, the mosaic floor shattered. He was younger than she expected, barely a man, but his eyes were watchful. She handed him the letter without speaking. He looked down, then up. "You? I'm no one," she said, and walked away. By dawn, the city was screaming. Amir stood at the top of the western balcony, robes discarded, weapons cast aside. His silhouette framed the rising sun, his face cut from stone. Below, soldiers gathered, some still loyal, others uncertain. He looked out across the rooftops, across the streets where children now ran with flags in their hands instead of bread. He saw the same flame that had taken his wife, his honor, his country. And then he turned to find her there, Rania, standing at the edge of the archway, her robe stained with dust, her eyes steady. "I know," he said. "You read it." She nodded. "You sent it?" Another nod. He stepped toward her, slow and grave. "You shouldn't have risked it. I wasn't the one they betrayed." Their eyes held for a moment longer. "You're not just a witness," he said, voice hoarse. "You've become part of this." "I always was," she answered. There was no distance between them now. And in that moment, where the city burned and betrayal closed in from all sides, they said nothing more. There were no locks left between them, no titles, no veils, only two souls shaped by fire, now facing it together. Cairo bled beneath a sky the color of gunmetal. What had begun as whispers now roared across the city like thunder. Fires burned in every quarter, not just the blazes of rebellion, but the controlled infernos lit by those desperate to erase the evidence of their crimes. The air was thick with smoke, with fear, with names uttered in the dark and vanished by morning. No house stood untouched, no life unchanged. At the western edge of the city, behind the crumbling outer wall of the Saadi estate, a final confrontation unfolded, not on a battlefield, but in the narrow alleys where loyalty was currency and betrayal bore no face. Amir had gone to meet the last group of defecting soldiers, not as their commander, but as their brother in revolt. His steps were heavy with knowledge that his name no longer held authority, that the men who once saluted him now hunted him, that Cairo itself was no longer his to protect, but still his to lose. The ambush came swiftly. Shots echoed against stone. The air split with the thunder of boots, and the screaming of orders barked in English and Turkish. Amid the chaos, Amir drew his dagger, not for victory, but for dignity. He struck, defended, defied, and then silence. When Barakat returned to the estate, his hands were bloodied and his voice hoarse. He carried nothing but a coat torn at the shoulder, and the news that Amir had fallen, that his body had not been recovered, that the soldiers had taken everything. The servants cried, some fled, some collapsed. Rania did neither. She moved. Through the secret staircases and forgotten corridors of the estate, she walked like a spectre. Down past the granary, beneath the servant kitchens, through the gate once used by smugglers long dead, she descended, carrying in her arms what the world believed lost. He was not dead, but he was close. His face was drained of color. His breath came in shallow gasps. Blood soaked his tunic, staining his skin, his hair, the scarf she pressed to his side. Her own hands trembled as she dragged him, step by agonizing step, into the tomb carved beneath the oldest wall of the palace, a forgotten burial chamber sealed off generations before. There was no light, no air, no safety, only stone and her. She covered the entrance with rubble and loose earth, leaving only a space for air. She lit a single oil lamp. She laid him on a cot of straw and silk robes torn into bandages. She pressed cloth to his wounds and whispered the name he could no longer answer to. Amir! His skin burned with fever. His lips moved, but gave no sound. He did not see her, but she saw him, and what he had given. He had chosen the people over power. He had chosen her over silence, and so she chose war. That night, she took the scarf from her neck, the same one her father had given her, the same one stained now with Amir's blood. She wrapped it around her head, letting it fall across her face like a veil. The crimson stain bloomed over her brow, down one cheek, like a wound the city could see. And then she stepped out. She moved through the back gate, under moonlight pale and sharp as glass. The city did not stop her. She was one of hundreds, veiled in pain, silent in rage. No soldier gave her more than a glance. She was invisible, but she carried fire. In her satchel, hidden within folded cloth, were the documents, the coded reports, the list of names, the letters Rania had transcribed by candlelight. She walked for hours, barefoot, past barricades and checkpoints, until she reached the hammam, where the rebels gathered in secret. She did not knock. She entered and placed the bundle into the hands of the man who had once doubted her. She's lying, someone whispered. She's a servant, said another. But then the leader opened the parchment and read aloud, and silence fell. The seal was real, the code undeniable, the betrayal laid bare, and with it, the truth. Amir el-Sadi had been targeted not for disobedience, but for conscience. Rania turned to leave, but the rebel leader stopped her. "Who are you?" She paused. Her voice, when it came, was not loud, but unshakable. "I am the girl no one saw, the servant who listened, the witness who survived. And now?" She looked him in the eyes. "Now I am his voice." The rebellion surged by dawn. Every whisper became a roar, every alley a battleground. The city rose, and with it, its people. Colonel Hartley fled the embassy in disguise. General Al-Mahdi was found dead, face down in the reflecting pool of his courtyard, a dove carved into his chest. And in the tomb beneath the palace, the fever broke. Amir opened his eyes to the flicker of firelight and the soft sound of cloth being rinsed in a basin. Pain bloomed behind his ribs, but he did not cry out. He turned his head and saw her. Rania sat with her back to him, one sleeve rolled up, the scarf he knew so well wrapped now around her shoulders, red with blood. His. "Rania!" His voice was hoarse, barely audible. She turned. For a moment, neither moved. Then she knelt beside him, gently taking his hand in hers. "You're awake." His lips trembled. "They said I was dead. You nearly were." Silence stretched between them, longer than the veil of time that had divided them before. He looked at her again, his eyes darker than ever. "Why did you come back?" She did not flinch, did not look away. "Not for loyalty," she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned. "For love." He closed his eyes, and a tear, singular, stubborn, escaped the corner. She rested her forehead against his shoulder, her fingers tracing the scar left behind. Outside, the world still burned. But in the chamber below the earth, something else ignited, quiet, eternal and stronger than fire, a vow not spoken, but lived. The desert had changed, not in color or silence, for its sands still stretched golden and wide, and the wind still whispered through the olive trees as it always had. But something in its breath had softened, as if the land, long pressed beneath the weight of empire and war, had exhaled, slowly, cautiously, like a soul relearning peace. It had been 4 months since Cairo burned, since names were erased and new ones etched into the city's memory, since power changed hands behind shuttered doors while blood was scrubbed from stone courtyards, since a general disappeared from every record, and a girl once veiled in silence stepped out of history and into legend, without a single word spoken in public. The British had not vanished, but they had recoiled, their patrols thinned, their flags faded beneath the sun. Their whispers became quieter than those of the people they had tried to rule. The city limped forward, scarred and slower, but breathing. And far from the river's edge, beyond the last gate of the southern district, nestled between dry hills and groves of flowering pomegranates, a small mud-brick villa rested in the arms of the land. It was modest, just 2 rooms, a shaded courtyard, and a garden that refused to die. Yet the walls stood firm, kissed by the breeze, softened by time. That was where Amir el-Saadi now lived, and not alone. Each morning, the first rays of sunlight crept over the threshold, golden and warm, as if reluctant to disturb the stillness inside. The windows were left open, always. Curtains swayed gently, and within those quiet rooms, Jasmine had returned, not wild as before, but carefully tended, climbing the lattice in slow, determined spirals. Rania rose before dawn, not from obligation, from rhythm. She moved through the house barefoot, her white linen robe trailing behind her like a shadow, her hair uncovered, falling down her back in thick, dark waves. The ink on her fingers stained softly at the edges of her sleeves, proof of what she had been doing the night before. Writing, she no longer copied reports or translated the maps of men. Now, she wrote her own truth. On pages bound in leather and stitched with thread, she carved a testimony no one had asked for, but that history needed. It was her father's story, her story, the story of those who had been lost beneath names like traitor and rebel and servant. She wrote in Arabic first, then French, one day perhaps English. In the courtyard, she kept a table beneath the olive tree. The wind moved gently through the branches, carrying scents of mint and wild thyme. Some mornings, she read aloud from the notebook. Others, she simply stared into the hills, where the light shimmered off the rocks like scattered coins. Amir often watched her in those hours. He stood by the window, leaning slightly, still stiff from the wounds that had nearly taken his life, but healing. His robes were simpler now, light cotton in soft earth tones. The uniform was long gone. So was the title. No more guards, no more scrolls, just a man, a house, and the woman who had seen him when no one else dared. She never turned until he called her, and he never spoke her name without reverence. Rania. It was late morning now. The sun filtered through the olive leaves, dappling her skin with gold and shadow. She looked up from the pages, slow and serene. Her face was calm, her eyes steady. And when she smiled, without veil, without hesitation, it was the smile of a woman who had walked through fire and returned with her soul intact. She rose from the bench, brushing the dust from her skirt, and stepped toward him. Her hand reached for his, as it had that first time, in the depths of the tomb where she had kept him breathing with the sheer will of love. They did not need to speak, but he did. "I never imagined this," he said, his voice low, still deep, but no longer cold. "This quiet, this peace." Her fingers tightened around his. "It isn't peace," she replied. "Not yet, but it's the beginning of one." Inside the house, the kettle sang softly. On the shelf rested a stack of finished pages tied with red thread. On the wall hung a simple carving of a dove, hand-carved in olive wood. No medals, no portraits, just a symbol once whispered in secret, now displayed with quiet defiance. In the evening, they walked through the grove together. Sometimes they spoke of the past. More often they did not. She asked him once if he missed Cairo. He shook his head. "I never belonged to the city," he said, "only to its burden." "And now?" she asked. He looked at her, eyes warmer than any sun. "Now I belong to what I chose." She knew what he meant, and she carried it within her. Their love was not loud. It did not need declarations beneath balconies or songs sung by strangers. It was made of glances that lingered too long, of hands that reached out without thinking, of nights spent in silence, her head against his chest as his heartbeat told her he was still there. They shared bread and laughter. They argued over the names of distant stars. She taught him to write with his left hand when the right ached too much. He planted basil where she once scattered mint. They buried their pain beneath roots and wrote over it with verses. One night, beneath the moon, she whispered, "Do you ever dream of before?" His answer was slow, "Only when I forget how far we've come." By the end of the season, jasmine covered the wall. Rania stood by the gate one morning, arms crossed, ink-stained hands resting against her stomach. The sky was blue, wide, infinite. A breeze moved her hair, and for a moment she closed her eyes. She felt him before she heard him. Rania. She opened her eyes, turned, no longer veiled, no longer afraid. And there he was, watching her with the gaze of a man who had known death and chosen life. She smiled, not as a servant, not as a symbol, but as his partner and his peace. The desert had softened. Time had brushed its hand over the land, like a mother calming a restless child. The winds still came in from the west, carrying sand and secrets, but their bite had dulled. Cairo, once scarred by fire and fractured by empire, now pulsed with a quieter rhythm. It had not forgotten, it never would, but it had begun to heal. And far from its crowded streets and shaded mosques, past the old olive groves and beyond the hills that turned golden at dusk, the villa still stood. A little older, a little worn, but alive. Jasmine climbed the walls now with confidence, no longer tentative. A fig tree had grown taller than the roof. The windows, though weathered, still opened every morning, and laughter, gentle, fleeting, echoed sometimes through the courtyard. Inside, the air smelled of parchment rosewater and bread. A boy sat cross-legged on the cool stone floor, scribbling onto a sheet of paper with great concentration. His curls, dark and disobedient, fell over his eyes. A girl, slightly younger, barefoot and wide-eyed, crouched beside him, watching him draw a falcon with wings too large for the page. "Why does it have 3 eyes?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Because it sees everything." Outside, beneath the shade of the olive tree, Rania sat on a wooden bench, her dress faded by sun and memory, her eyes distant as she listened to the sound of their voices. In her lap rested a bound copy of her book, Whispers Beneath the Veil, now published in Arabic, French, and, at long last, English. The spine was cracked from use. Her name was printed in gold on the cover, though she rarely said it aloud. She turned the page absently, but she was not reading. She was remembering. 8 years had passed since she walked through Cairo with Amir's blood on her scarf. 8 years since she defied history by simply surviving. Since she stood before the man who had once commanded an army and said, "For love." That love had changed. It had grown quieter, fiercer, deeper. It had learned to live between dishes left unfinished, stories read in half-sleep, and worries that came in the night and had no name. They had fought, they had forgiven, they had held each other through silence and thunder, through the ache of what the world would never give back. They had 2 children, not planned, not expected, but born with the same stubborn fire that had once carried their mother across a burning city and made their father betray a crown. Amir still rose early. His hair had silvered at the temples. A limp followed him now, a souvenir from a wound that had healed but never forgiven. He spent his mornings in the garden, tending the jasmine, teaching the boy how to care for the roots, how to trim without killing. In the evenings, he read aloud, books in Arabic, poems in Persian, the occasional letter from allies he no longer trusted but still respected. He no longer wore a uniform. He no longer spoke of the war. But sometimes, when the children were asleep and Rania stood brushing her hair in the candlelight, he would approach her from behind, rest his hand at her waist, and whisper, "I almost lost you." And she would reply, always the same, "You never had to keep me, only see me." Not everyone had survived those years. Halima passed in her sleep 5 winters ago. They buried her beneath the fig tree in the courtyard. Rania planted jasmine at her feet. Barakat, Amir's loyal guard, had returned to the city and opened a tea house near the old university. He served students who carried hidden leaflets beneath their robes, just as others once had. He never asked questions, But every evening he lit a lantern outside the door, a quiet tribute to the rebels who had once passed by in shadow. The British remained, though diminished. Their flags flew from fewer buildings, their soldiers patrolled less, their whispers had grown cautious. The people had not forgotten the betrayal, nor had they forgiven, but they had learned to live in the space between resistance and peace. And General Yusuf al-Mahdi, his name had been erased from official records, but not from memory. His death, violent, symbolic, had been both an ending and a warning. For power built on silence would always fall to those who dared to speak. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting amber light across the stones, Rania closed her book and stood. Her back ached slightly now, but she moved with the grace of a woman who had nothing to prove and everything to remember. She stepped into the courtyard where Amir knelt beside their daughter, showing her how to coax mint from the soil. He looked up. Their eyes met, still, and in that gaze time dissolved. No war, no empire, no veil, only love. The kind that did not shout, did not burn, but endured, quiet and constant, like the jasmine that bloomed again. In a world torn by silence and power, Rania and Amir's story reminds us that true strength is not always loud. It is quiet, steady, and born in the moments when no one is watching. It's in the courage to choose love over fear, truth over obedience, and hope over resignation. This was more than a tale of forbidden romance. It was a testament to the unseen, those who live in the shadows, who endure without applause, who resist in silence until the world is ready to listen. And when it finally does, everything changes. If this story moved you, if Rania's resilience or Amir's redemption touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. What part stayed with you the most? What did this journey awaken in you? And if you've made it this far, write the word Jasmine in the comments. That way we'll know you walked every step of this path with us. Your presence matters more than you know. We've shared a story of resistance, rebirth, and timeless love, but there's more waiting for you. Check out the other stories I've linked in the cards. Each one carries its own magic, its own legacy. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the quietest voices are the ones that change history. We'll see you in the next story.